All right, everybody, welcome to the webinar for Operations and Supply Chain Management. And I have four fabulous Cameron Brooks alumni from all the way ranging from 2019 through 2023 that are working in operations team leadership or started in that cross-functional roles and operations supply chain planning to share their experience. And so instead of a Cameron Brooks representative, me in this case, talking with you and educating you on what operations supply chain management is, I invited our alumni out there that are in these roles, these career paths, to talk about their experience of what they do, where you can learn more, and what you can expect if you were to go into a role like they've gone into an operations supply chain. So my job, my role, or our role in this webinar is to define the career field, and it's really a career field that encompasses a lot of things. So it's hard to really pinpoint because operations supply chain can be logistics. It can be part of manufacturing, even though we really have manufacturing as another career field. It also means leading teams of people in an operations environment like a retail or a logistics distribution environment. We have somebody here representing that as well. So we want to define the career field, explore common misperceptions, some of we call it connecting points, but maybe some of the work you've done in the military that relates to this in the business world. And then hear a little bit about the nature of the work that these four Cameron Brooks alumni do. So welcome. If you're here, I want to welcome the alumni. And we're just going to go ahead and go right over to the first slide. Danny, if you would go ahead and just introduce yourself to the audience, to the people that are coming here to listen to this or watch this, tell them a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Danny Baker. I was at the April 2020 conference. Did about 8 years into the an active Army, and I got out as a Army MP captain. I went to school at Tennessee Tech and finished up my MBA with Indiana University since I've been out. I started off my career leaving, from the Cameron Brooks conference. That was really the first virtual conference that we were doing. So the whole time at April of 2020 was very, unsure. A lot of things were kind of trying to figure out what is everybody going to do. And I started off with as a value stream supervisor at Catalent in the inspection and packaging area. Catalent is a biopharmaceutical contract manufacturing company, and I've been in the operations field area ever since.
Yeah, really fortuitous time too, because Calvin was always coming to that conference well before we moved to a virtual, and COVID actually hit, and Catalent became one of the major manufacturers of the COVID vaccine.
Manufacturing. Yeah, it was interesting, kind of transitioning from the military, where it's a high operational environment, to COVID happening, and then Catalent received our first big contract for 300 million doses of the Moderna vaccine. So transitioning from a high op tempo into another high op tempo environment was a really an unexpected start, but I think it was definitely something that helped with the transition.
Yeah, great. Very good, Danny. And Bobby, you weren't too far after him, as we were talking, probably a couple conferences after him in the 2020 timeframe. So if you just, Bobby, share a little bit about your background and your logistics supply chain roles that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I transitioned out 3 months later. I think I was in like the July conference, or June conference of 2020. I was a Army infantry officer for 5 years, and then immediately joined Exceltas Technologies, which is a high-tech manufacturing company with, at the time, we had about 18 factories around the world, and we were sub 1 billion in revenue. Since then, we've grown quite a bit to 25 factories and about 1.5 billion in revenue. I've been in the global supply chain organization the whole time. I started off in the logistics organization, really starting that practice. So running our shipping and receiving departments, our trade organization, and how material flows from a physical, financial, and digital perspective through our factories. And then recently took on an expanded role, running what we're calling our global strategic sourcing indirect. So any non-product related expenses, it's about 20 different commodity categories. everything from chemicals and machinery and fasteners, all the way to how we negotiate for leases and IT expenses. Also pursuing an executive MBA right now through Cornell University. I finish up in the next few weeks.
Congratulations again. And then Danny, as you too as well, saw you finished up your MBA at Indiana University. All right, Stacy, tell us, thank you for being here. And tell us a little, well, I know about you, but tell the listeners and viewers about you.
No, absolutely. So my name is Stacy Lynch. I joined the Cameron Brooks program in the year of 2018 when I was stationed in Fort Carson, Colorado. Went through the program for about a year before attending the January 2019 conference. I then decided, after interviewing with those 13 fabulous companies, to join Love's Travel Stops. And I moved from Fort Carson, Colorado, down to the Panhandle of Florida to become an operations manager at one of their busiest stores at the time. It's actually been pretty awesome because when I joined the company, there were only 400 and something stores. And then over the last 5.5 years, we now have 650 plus locations. And I even had the privilege as a district manager, the opportunity to open up our 600th store. So it's been extremely motivating. I also stayed in the Army. So while I did 7 years of active duty, I got out as an Army Air Defense Artillery captain, but I recently promoted to major. The company has been extremely supportive of my desire to continue serving in the service. So if anyone finds a company that will support that cause, I would encourage it. But Love's has been extremely good to me. I was an operations manager, got to see everything from the ground up, cleaning the dirty bathrooms to taking care of employees that it was their first job or they'd been a tenured employee for years and years. Became a general manager in Brunswick of a store that had transitioned from being a pilot. Wasn't there long though, because I was mobilized in support of the COVID effort with my reserve unit at the time to New Orleans, Louisiana. Came back, had an opportunity to run one of our truck care locations, which at the time was not something I was overly interested in, but then super glad I did it, made me a more versatile leader. And came out here to Oklahoma City, where the Love's headquarters is, became a district manager for 2.5 years, and now I'm at the corporate office as in the new manager of merchandising role, which I actually get to kind of mold. It's a new role. They created it, and that's been an exciting thing for the last 7 months.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. Appreciate it. Bo.
Yeah, so I joined the Army 2015. I joined the Oklahoma National Guard as an infantryman, served for 5 years, and then did ROTC at Cameron University. Graduated and then commissioned as a logistics officer, was sent up to Alaska. And that's when I decided to get out, I found Cameron Brooks, a buddy that was at down in North Carolina, had mentioned Cameron Brooks to me, and so I joined Cameron Brooks in September of 2023, and then did the November hiring conference. And I got a job offer to go work for HF Sinclair as a procurement specialist in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I started in February. My wife, she had her first kid in December, so I started a little bit later than everyone else in my conference. And I've loved every minute of it. It's very challenging and it's fun.
Sounds good, Bo. Bo, what makes it fun? Maybe since you can't, I'd love to hear, I know we're going to get in a minute, but since you ended that, what makes it fun?
So well, I'll go back. I interviewed with my boss on a Monday, and then Wednesday night we had dinner, and I asked him, like, it was dinner. So I said, what's your day-to-day look like? And he's like, dude, no 2 days look the exact same. And that is 1,000,000% the truth. It's just ever changing. It's always something new. You don't ever just get bogged down with just the monotonous work. It's always something new, something challenging, something to figure out, an opportunity to change a process or save money. And I can make a difference. That's what makes it so fun.
Great. Very good. I'm sure we'll hear some of the same from other people as well. So this is about the really only part I want to do much talking. So what is operations? The definition, sometimes these career field definitions, Cameron Brooks has to kind of make them up and to put them into buckets. But so the way we talk about operations is all activities involved in the supply chain, which include like the procurement. So Bo is doing procurement to, inventory management, warehousing, distribution. Bobby's doing the procurement. Danny, you're doing the supply chain operations. Obviously, Stacy, you've been around a lot of what's in inventory with the truck care and things like that. Now with stores, and love to hear a little bit more about your merchandising, obviously running a store and transportation. So we've got those kind of things, what includes a lot of logistics, but also leading teams of people in a non-manufacturing environment also get lumped into this operations environment. So think team leadership, mostly around logistics type of environment, whether you're planning or the sourcing, the movement of inventory, raw materials, or the distribution of it, or running some sort of operation that's not necessarily manufacturing. We talk about that logistics, especially, is a very competitive advantage for companies. I remember when I came through in 1999, this was a big thing. And I was like, 25 years ago, it's big. It was just starting to get really big. Companies like Walmart were really growing. It was showing us that Walmart was the differentiator of Walmart and all the other retailers out there, is that they got logistics right. And they became not just a retailer, but they were really a logistics company, getting the right product to the right place at the right time at the right price. That became the differentiator. And the logistics career field really in that time has exploded. And the operations career field, the supply chain management, how do we optimize my supply chains? My hypothesis has been, as I've watched this, is the global economy continues to shrink in terms of how close we are to one another and where we source. So we have to be more competitive. The competition with prices. I think COVID and the supply chain disruption caused a lot of changes the way that we do supply chain. So that created some more opportunities there and created a very much a dynamic environment. This is another way to look at it. There's using streamlining operations. Danny, you talked about being a value stream manager. That's kind of like manufacturing, but you're also around packaging. So how do you maximize the value of what you're doing? You got to get efficient. And there's a lot of information technology, data that people are using. So I'm going to stop here before we kind of jump into this slide that explains it, kind of what supply chain looks like. And I'm just going to kick this back over to Eric, guys. I've given this like this is a Cameron Brooks definition of it. You guys live it. One of you just grab this and like, Joel, this is really what supply chain and operations is.
So I'm still learning a lot of the supply chain piece in my new role. Having been in operations for the first 5 years of being a part of Love's, I saw mostly the operations and the retail side of it. I mean, everything we receive is the final product. And so the part that is most visible, or at least was most visible to me from the supply chain side of it, was the final mile, if you're familiar with that. Getting from the distribution center or the warehouse to the store and getting there as expediently as possible. The pandemic certainly disrupted this. We saw disruption just this past week with the hurricane that devastated the Southeast and had to take detours and go down different avenues, use technology, get people to get products where it needed to go in order to help customers and still have an open business where people were going. And so I'm still learning, like I said, about the supply chain side of it, but I am really interested in learning about what everyone else has seen from their side.
Yeah, I think whenever I think about supply chain management and kind of my exposure to this within operations is really understanding systems, and I think that's probably one of the things that supply chain and operations connected so well together that I think one of my takeaways from my time in the Army was how different nodes connect and how synapses between those functions come together. When you think about the whole supply chain and the operations happening in a very parallel space, because each part of the operation is fed through that supply chain in different facets. And so you have all these internal customers that, from the beginning of a raw material or an OEM product all the way through to the finished product, each stage has got its own connection to that supply chain network, and each stage of the operation requires that constant connection between where's my material coming from, how am I going to be optimizing my own efficiency within the making of what I'm doing, and then how am I sending it downstream to the next piece, the next node in that system, and what do they need to be able to make it. So it's when I see these two come together, they're two very, very parallel and interdependent systems.
And that's why I advanced the slide when you were talking about how how they're all interconnected and passing it on. You have this on the way at the other end on the right of this slide, you have the customer. In the case, Stacy, you were a customer because you're running a store. You had customers coming in as well. So you, on one hand, you're the customer because you're the store receiving the product you wanted there. You have customers coming in, meeting their need. And then at the front end, somebody's got to plan all this. And you've seen this, Bobby and Bo and Danny, you've probably seen a lot of this from production, and you're involved with, you guys could talk about it because you guys, I think, Bobby and Bo, you're doing a lot of the sourcing piece. So somebody wants to plan the whole supply chain, and it starts with grabbing the data of what you have. What do the customers want? Where is this? And how are we going to do this? And then you got to source all of it. And sourcing, you guys can talk to this, it's products that go right into the material that they're making. A lot of people think about it that way, but there's sourcing from and you guys should talk about this too, but there's also sourcing of services. There's sourcing of materials to keep plants up and running that aren't even going into the product. And then, this middle production performance, we separate it out as a separate category into manufacturing, but it's really integrated. And then you got this finished product or component. How do we get it out to the distribution centers, and how do we get it to the place? And then as Stacy talked about that last mile out there. So that's what I brought up that slide, but I love Bobby or Bo. I see Bobby's off mute. So maybe you go ahead, Bobby, talk a little bit about your part of the supply chain.
I really enjoyed what Bo said about talking with his boss, that no 2 days are alike. And I think kind of connecting back to what it was like in the Army, being a supply chain professional is kind of like moving between being a squad leader one day and then an XO in the next meeting, and then being on division staff, the meeting after, where you're doing some tactical firefighting at one point, where you're just trying to get one part to the right space so that it can move immediately into production to support the company making revenue by the end of the week. And then, the next meeting is a new product introduction where you're collaborating with engineering, working on a design that might happen 5 to 7 years from now. And you're trying to identify a supplier with the technical capability, either in Asia or Europe, who can support that production based off of a forecast, a couple of years out, based off of macroeconomic conditions. It's been a pretty unique career field for me in a lot of ways, because I've got to see the entire cycle of the supply chain. Being in distribution operations prior to moving into indirect supply chain, I mapped my company's kind of network from our inbound material as it flowed from the suppliers, how we were vertically integrated because we grew through mergers and acquisitions. So how our factories were connected in their sourcing strategy, and what parts between our factories were actually going into other parts of our company that we didn't know about. And then finally, how product was flowing out to customers, and how it was impacting the finances if there was some margin dilution because we were covering shipping, or there was a tax impact because it was flowing to another region. And so for me, I'd say supply chain overall is learning how a company functions and the guts of a company. And a supply chain professional is really somebody who is willing to get super far into the weeds and devil's in the details, because a lot of other business professionals, maybe they don't have the discipline or that kind of level of detail or that level of familiarity of being that detailed to do it on behalf of the organization. And I think that's what makes, military officers special for it, is most of us are pretty willing to do it when we transition into these kind of roles.
Yeah.
I would definitely agree with that statement, Bobby. I love that, because as a military officer, I think we learn to do most is manage complexity and variability. And that is what is demanded in supply chain management and even in operations because you've got, gosh, supply disruptions, market fluctuations, just everything from the variability in demand forecasting, out of stocks, in stocks, et cetera, like all of that. How do you best manage the complexity of it all? I guess. What are your best practices?
Is that a question for Bobby or Bo? Do you want to jump in?
Well, for anyone, I suppose, just because the learning curve for me and my new role these last 7 months has been an extremely fascinating one, just from that standpoint.
I mean, I think for me, just kind of like reaching off the top of the mind, I always go back to like people, process, tools, technology. Right. Like I've sort of built out my network of people over the last few years through relationships, either inside the company or key suppliers that I can kind of rely on. That when I do run into a certain issue, like, man, I just know who to go back to. One person in particular, and similar to like the platoon sergeant experience, was a person on my team who's actually 68 years old, who was sort of my mentor initially in my role, and now is one of my direct reports. But he normally has an experience that he can reach back to in his career that feels just like a platoon sergeant, that he can mentor me through it. Process wise, a lot of that is just like kind of like establishing, TTPs or those sort of like standardizations that becomes like the battle drill, right? That I think everybody's familiar with. And then tool development, I'm definitely not the best at this, but there is, incredible technology out there that we weren't really exposed to in the military, that a lot of these companies are developing that I think will solve supply chain issues in the future. And like Power BI, some of these data lakes, even some of the stuff other companies are doing with AI.
That's fair. One size doesn't fit all, for sure.
Well, go ahead if you have anything to jump in. Otherwise, I have a question for you, Bo. If you don't have it, I'm sure you have something to comment you're off. And also,
I was going to say, in refining, we're the procurement office, as you saw in my picture from the slideshow. Like, I was out in the refinery walking around with our internal stakeholders and the supplier, talking about the plan of what they were going to do during the turnaround. And I think that's where I found a lot of success, is with my internal stakeholders, building those relationships, and truly understanding what they're trying to do. I do not know anything. The Army didn't teach me anything about refining. So really letting them tell me what exactly they need, technical specs, all the super specific stuff. And then them trusting me to go out and source it and find the best fit for them that's going to work.
well, question for you, since you just started in February and spent about 9 months or so. What's the biggest thing that surprised you about supply chain in the business world, just in general?
I think, well, in refining, especially how hectic it is, because oil and gas, I'm sure everyone else's industry is 24/7, but we don't shut down. So, might get a call at 11 o'clock at night. Hey, we ran out of salt. We need salt for the DHTU or something like that. That was the most surprising thing, because when I initially interviewed, it was, an office job, and maybe that's because my boss is giving me a little bit more of a leadership role in our team, that I'm exposed to those things. But just how it never stops, and how complex it is.
Danny, I would imagine that's probably a similar experience that you had as well. Like Catalent's up and running, and that's pretty constant. You can't shut down that facility. You're constantly moving raw materials in, making them finished product, moving product out.
Yeah, certainly. We run a 24/7 shop. And so it's definitely, to Bo's point, there's constant firefights that are happening throughout the day and throughout the night. And, I think one of the things I've found as a challenge is managing teams through off shifts, and having the same amount of capability on a 24/7 is not always easy, especially because recruiting for those off shifts is not easy, and being able to have the talent that you need for those areas is definitely something that you have to come up with unique ways to provide those incentives. And, we can't have a slump in production or a decrease in our outputs when we go into those night hours. And so it's been definitely a challenge to kind of work through.
I think that this is my own personal question. Can we talk about the technology that you use to assist? Because Bobby, maybe you could talk about this because you talked about people, processes, technology, and I can't remember the fourth word that you use. But can you talk about technology and then or processes? Because we've got Six Sigma, Lean, and automation technology. Can you talk to one of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk a bit on the technology piece. I think everyone was pretty familiar with like the level of reporting that was required out of officers in the military, and it's really similar in the supply chain environment. That data and reporting is what drives decision making, especially at a higher management level. And shockingly, in companies, there's a lot of bad data out there, and it drives bad decision making. And so, part of supply chain is supply chain master data or supply chain data management. And generating reports that are useful, that are going to drive important decision making. And most companies, or at least the companies that I've been exposed to so far in my career, they're on some sort of operating system, commonly referred to as ERPs, that is doing a lot of their processing for them, and then outputting data in a raw format that a lot of the layperson isn't able to manipulate with. And so, for me, in my role, part of our supply chain activity has been generating a strategy on how do we make data more accessible to the decision maker so that it can drive a faster decision. So one of the sprints that I took on, and this was still in the supply chain realm, was building out a series of dashboards through Power BI, business intelligence, available from Microsoft, that would draw from our data lake periodically and make some easy graphs for the kind of commander in the factory to see regularly what was going on and drive their decision making, so that we could find like those cross portfolio synergies. And throughout the process, I think the kind of things I've learned are still pertinent today. Right, bad data in, bad data out. It's just sort of continuous maintenance of data itself is another thing. So master data management. It's helped me realize that really the kind of core partner to good supply chain, especially at the strategic level, is often IT and finance, which is an unexpected surprise to me. And then last of all, it's on, part of that technology is how easily it communicates and the level that you get user adoption. And through those kind of things, it drives improvement.
Very good. Does anybody want to talk about Six Sigma, Lean, process improvement, where you may have seen it in your environments, or talk to we talk a lot about if you're going to go into team leadership, operations, or even manufacturing, you got to be aware of what Lean is, Six Sigma, Lean. And so we talk about it theoretically, and we have people read about it. Can any of you talk about, this is what our company did, this is what it looks like?
Yeah, certainly. I can chime in for this on either lean manufacturing and kind of the Six Sigma process. When we were expanding, when I first joined the company in the summer of 2020, the site that I joined had about 700 people, and then within 18 months we grew to about 4,500. And so we had this massive expansion, this massive growth, and we put in about $400 million worth of investment into expanding the facility, and we created these new production lines and had all these, in order to meet some of the COVID vaccine demand and some of the other therapies that we were developing and working on. But what that meant was, with this massive influx of people and all this new equipment, we have to figure out how do we effectively continue to feed it and run it without wasting all of this space and all of this time. And so one of the things that we did a lot of was time studies, where we would look at these tasks, and this is kind of industrial engineering, basics, but we'd look at these tasks that people would have to perform. We would study out how long it takes them to do it. We would then put them together with other tasks and try and maximize the least amount of work for any person to do, and the least amount of variability that any person can do, and have the maximum amount of output. And so in pharmaceutical production, we do everything on a batch related focus, not necessarily the TPS or the Toyota production system model where it's a continuous flow. But by doing things in, looking how can we be more efficient in our process, everything impacts the margin, and can we do more with less is really a massive push that we work through. And, we got to where we're building a much more refined process through, for those years. So.
Sounds good. So yeah, trying to eliminate those steps, especially in a growth mode, trying to find those efficiencies. We certainly don't have to talk about all these supply chain misconceptions. We talked a little bit about them, in just about how critical this is, how much change there is. No 2 days are alike. I mean, sometimes I hear from people like, well, hey, I've already done that in the military. I don't really want to do the same thing, but I'm getting the sense of like what you've doing in the business world functionally isn't really all that close to what you were doing in the military, even if you were a logistician. Is that accurate? That you're using some of the way you think, but just the processes and the systems are just totally different.
Yeah, exactly, Joel. And I did want to hit on this middle bullet point: cost is the most important factor for a misconception. One thing my boss has taught me is there's a big difference in price and cost. And when we do our sourcing analysis, we want to look at total cost of ownership. Are we going to sure this company XYZ is the cheapest, but are we going to bring them in here and they're going to drag their feet and then they're going to change order us 10 times and just, surpass the cost of the the average market value. So I think that there is a big difference in cost and price, and learning to think that way, and then also getting, for me, your internal stakeholders to think that way as well, is definitely a challenge, but that's also what makes it fun.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there any other misperceptions on here anybody would want to talk about that they've experienced? So maybe one way you were thinking is not that way at all.
I would say that supply chains are definitely not linear. This was actually a conversation I'd recently had this week in a different meeting, because one size doesn't fit all. We commented on that earlier, and to the cost reduction too, as we just talked about, isn't the only goal, but you have to have effective collaboration among all of the stakeholders. You have to have effective employee training, because they play a vital part in the supply chain and the operations piece of it all to give the overall success. You have to have process optimization, and this takes time. And so for that other bullet to say faster is always better, that is not the case. Fast is smooth is fast, fast is smooth, I think, is a popular saying. So we take our time to try to get it right. Yeah, supply chains they're not linear. And even technology, again, it's not going to solve all of the problems. We think it might enhance technology. It takes the person out of it, but you need the person in it. Whether that person is providing you the feedback to make the process better, or that person is telling you what's wrong with technology, etc. So.
Very good.
Yeah, sorry, Joel, if I could kind of piggyback off of that with Stacy real quick on the technology will solve all supply chain problems. So it's really easy for us to look at technology as a problem solving piece, when the biggest problem solving is really just us, right? And one of the things that the Army does really well, or I'm sure other services do really well, is teach officers how to make good decisions and how to assess a situation, how to analyze where you're at, how to use pillars of whether it's principles in quality or a result that you're trying to accomplish, or even just something as simple as applying things like a commander's end state, and that level of problem solving when you're operating in ambiguity, that technology can't do any of those things. Technology gives data, technology provides some of those things that we can use, but the biggest asset for really solving these problems is just the crucial thing that the military teaches young officers really well is, how do I solve problems? How do I sift through the unknown and come out with a solution?
Yeah, because the technology is not always going to be the problem solver. It's going to give you the data, as Bobby was saying, getting accurate data. Certainly, they can forecast and get you the data. Artificial intelligence is helping us, big data is helping us, but in the end, it's people that make the decisions, the people that execute on that. I'm going to go to this key attributes of connecting points again. I don't want to talk about it on the slides. Let me just start with Bo, you're the most recent out there. You've talked about this role. It's changing for you a little bit. What traits, and it doesn't have to be off this slide, but what traits do you use that you developed in the military that you use, most days, most weeks, or that are allowing you to succeed in the role that you're in?
So the number one trait is the relationship building with internal stakeholders, suppliers. I'm still very new. I don't know everything, but knowing who to go to, kind of like Bobby said earlier, like knowing who the person is that would like help you answer that has helped me greatly. As well as the analytical skills, data analysis is obviously very important during strategic sourcing. So, learning how to take a set of numbers, in the Army, it was, motor pool operational rates and, graph them out, put them on a spreadsheet, so we can easily identify what the problems are. That's the same for here. Bid analysis, you get everything apples to apples, and then making, like Bobby said, making it easier for upper leadership to make a decision based on this data.
Bobby, what is one thing or one characteristic or trait do you wish you were had more developed when you started? It doesn't even have to be supply chain, but maybe it is supply chain related, but when you started in business?
I definitely wish I would have leaned heavierly or more heavily into the financial intelligence piece. Finances and accounting is the language of business. And it's a big part of the reason why after 3 years of transitioning into the world, I decided to pursue an MBA. Was I felt like that was one piece of the fluency of the private sector that I really needed a lot of catching up on. So I wish I would have walked away from the military with a little bit more like intelligence in that realm. Because now that I have been through all that coursework, I feel like I'm in the same conversations, in the same meetings, in the same rooms, but I'm catching a lot more of the conversation, and I understand that executive level decision making a lot better.
Yeah, it's good. Stacy, curiosity for you, because you're more like this operation team leadership, running a store. You've gotten exposed to logistics and so many different things. What do you, in your 5 years that you've been, working in, this is when you looked at that year one, and this is, what do you wish Cameron Brooks would have done in our development program that would have prepared you to be able to come in and lead better in an operational environment?
I have to say, Joel, you have a top-notch program. I don't actually feel like there was anything you could have done differently that would have ill-prepared me. I don't like saying it like that, but like Bobby, my largest opportunity going in was the business acumen piece, the analytics piece. And then now, 5.5 years later, it's the project management platforms that I'm not accustomed to. So if I were to say, if there's something you could add to your program, it would be more introduction to the project management aspects of roles to prepare for something later. I didn't need that so much as a brand new operations manager running a store, but I definitely need it now. And it's been a learning curve kind of getting up to speed on like those types of platforms and those types of analytics. The Mondays.coms, all of the different AHA, you name it, I'm learning it right now as it pertains to certain projects that I'm having to manage.
I assume that's probably something that Danny, Bobby, and Bo, that you are experiencing, is getting on these projects. Like Bo, you were talking, I meant to come back, and Bo was talking about refinery and turnarounds. Just for the listeners, he's at an oil and gas refinery. And you shut down parts of the facility and do a massive turnaround. What's the average investment of a turnaround project?
Um, we're doing a smaller turnaround next March, but I asked that question, what is the investment here? Most of them are north of $100 million.
Yeah, so you're talking about $100 million worth of, not, I mean, there's services that are in there, but this is $100 million worth of equipment and systems that are brought in place. So it's massive. Back to the state's point, there's massive project management that goes into this, and project management piece um, that I think you were mentioning. It's not only just how to manage a project, but project management software, understanding how to use data to make decisions, the data analytics that are out there. So I think we've heard a lot of things in the conversation today about relationship building. And I think that means leadership, to leading cross-functionally, building those relationships. But you can't lead and influence unless you have a relationship, trust. Danny, you were talking about this process improvement and really getting operational excellence as you build this organization up. Technical analytical skills we just talked about problem solving. And so what we haven't really talked about, this is interesting, I want to pause here, is you have to have functional logistics experience. That hasn't come out yet. I mean, I'm sure that's helpful, but how come, just out of curiosity, you haven't led with that? Was that just an implied, or is it not as important as all these other things?
I think I could probably speak to this a bit because I was an infantry officer and not in the logistics or supply chain management realm in the military. I took over an organization that spends 25 to 30 million a year on logistics, and that was my responsibility, was immediately that cost center and a 7 to 10% cost down each year against it. All of the skills that I'd gained in the military was exactly what applied to supply chain management there. I'd never been an XO, I'd never been an S4, but being a platoon leader and being an AS3 was exactly what it was like translating into being a supply chain manager.
Sounds great.
100%.
So, kind of a typical day. We've already addressed this. There's no real such thing as a typical day. But let me just grab a question. Well, why don't we this is how we'll finish. Each of you grab one question, and you can't, maybe not going to have to prepare ahead of time. But it's okay if you repeat, but I'm going to go ahead and start with Stacy. Take one of these questions, and why don't you answer it for the audience? If this is an audience asking you one of these, what would you say? You just pick one of them.
What was my first 90 days like? The first year at Love's Travel Stops. Well, I will tell you that you clean a lot of bathrooms, make a lot of Subway sandwiches, you interact with some of the most diverse team members as well as customers that you will ever have the opportunity to interact with. However, the first 90 days, it's definitely the most cultural shocking, because you're like, wow. You find yourself saying that almost every single day because there's no typical day. The store I started at was just north of Destin, so all of the vacationers went down there. I saw people from all sorts of walks of life, and I'm trying to get to know them, the regulars, and then the new customers that would come in while starting to learn the retail piece of it, the acumen side of it, what a 1 a.m. look looks like, what front-facing a cooler looks like, front-facing center store, what diesel side looks like, how to balance a cash drawer, which, it's easier said than done when you've got cashiers that might mishandle money and then you have to chase it down and figure out where it went. The first 90 days were a roller coaster, but I remember them the most and the freshest. The first year, 8 months as an OM, 4 months as a GM, I had a great deal of support. So when you're being intentional about choosing which company you want to be a part of, try to feel out those that you that are working for the company, that have had a mentor, that have had someone to champion them, because the first year is the hardest. It's the absolute hardest. You get through the first year, you're gonna make it. So that's what I would say. That's my question I'll answer.
Very good. Bobby, you want to grab one question off of here?
Yeah, I'd say what's the most rewarding aspect of your job? Been lucky to work in a global role and be exposed to quite a few factories. For me, the most rewarding aspect of my job has been, those large continuous improvement or factory turnaround projects I've been a part of. And in particular, I spent most of 2022, it's about 6 months at our location in Colorado. When we started there, their on-time delivery was in the dumps. They had a bunch of inventory stranded as work in production or work in progress on the factory floor, and just a bunch of other process issues. Spent most of my time in the hotel, and it was on the production floor up to 14 hours a day. But we traced the supply chain through the factory and outside the factory. We solved a lot of these issues, and then we walked away, and they were on a run rate to be 100 million in revenue by the end of the year. And the idea of walking away from something like that, being the person who's willing to get in the details, solve all these problems. Number one, it just alleviated a lot of stress for the employees who were there every day, who were miserable in their jobs. Number two, I felt like we were having an impact on the customer who is on the far end of the supply chain, who is a critical semiconductor customer, producing some of the most high-end technologies in the world. And then number three, I felt like walking away from it, like we saved a lot of jobs. And it's not quite at the far end of the extreme of like what you get to do on a deployment. But it was important, purposeful work that I was proud to do and put on my resume too.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bobby. Danny, why don't you grab one of the questions?
Yeah, I'd say my initial expectations definitely were not what things turned out to be. Going into pharmaceutical, I thought there would be a lot more lab work that I was doing, or at least part of. And while we certainly have labs within the facility and all over the place, right? The expectation that I had was that I didn't really see coming was that the amount of work that you put in just in a standard day in the military is more than what you think it is. And transitioning into a role where most of my team was working 8-hour days, and when you're up in the Army and you're at PT and you're leaving at you're up there at 6:30, you leave the office at 6-7 o'clock, you do that 5 days a week. You kind of you forget that it's a ton of work. And when you apply that, or just when I naturally kind of came into this role and was thinking about the amount of time I'm at work, days went by faster than I expected, just because the amount of time that you're at work in the Army is a lot. And I think that was a good expectation that I didn't see coming, but or good thing I didn't expect coming, but definitely something that is it might seem like it's going to be hard or difficult to transition, or but there's a lot that I think people do in the military that they don't really feel, or they don't necessarily give themselves credit for.
Very good. Thanks, Danny. Bo, what about you? One question you want to take?
When I saw this slide, I had this in mind, but the most rewarding aspect of your job, when I was going through the hiring conference, one of the questions companies would often ask is, what are you looking for? And I was like, well, I'm looking very early on, day one. And I've been able to do that at HF Sinclair. Like we were talking about turnarounds before, $100 million. Our procurement department, as I'm sure all of you are measured on KPIs, is value capture, the amount of money you can save certain materials or something like that. And I was able to save quite a lot for this upcoming turnaround. And just knowing that I make a difference, that the turnaround is going to run better, the company's going to save money, so we can do quality of life improvements or pay people more bonuses. That's the most rewarding aspect of my job, and that I get to, it's fun. It's not monotonous. Bobby and I talked about data analysis, and it's not like I don't sit behind a computer all day, every day. You know, I'm going to lunch with suppliers, talking about negotiating contracts and all that. So it's definitely work hard, play hard, but it's fun.
Great, thank you. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Here's some resources for people that are watching this. If you're in the program, a lot of these books are in the reading program. The Goal, What is Lean Six Sigma, Fundamentals of Project Management. There's a book that's on the recommended list called The Gold Mine. You know, we talked about project management. We also talked about finance. So there's financial intelligence. We also have a book on data analytics. We also have free Google certifications on project management, data analytics that we can offer people. That would also add to this slide now that you guys have shared. This was created before this meeting today. So as we wrap, thank you to all of you, to the 4 of you for being here. It's so good to see you. Some of you haven't seen you since the conference, so that's great to catch back up again. We certainly appreciate you here at Cameron Brooks, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with the team.